Towards the end of your book, you have a chapter on cancer screening. Talk about your current thoughts in that realm.
So, if anybody's interested in cancer screening, there's a book called, I always get the pronoun wrong, Should You Be Tested for Cancer? But it may be Should I Be Tested for Cancer? But it's one of the two, by a guy named Gilbert Welch. And he was a physician epidemiologist at Dartmouth in New Hampshire. And basically, the book is about looking at every screening study for cancer ever done. And that was his life's work. Now, it's important to say, what do we mean by screening? So screening means the person is fine, no symptoms, and you go looking for cancer. It's not somebody who has blood in their bowels. That's not screening, right? That's trying to find out why they have blood in their bowels. So you're screening asymptomatic, healthy people, like mammograms and colonoscopies and PSAs, and there's probably more. And his conclusion was there is no evidence that any of that either prolonged life or led to better quality of life. Zero. What happens sometimes, like with mammograms, is if you wait and find the lump and then treat it with conventional, medicine, person, I'm just going to make up a number, lives average of 7 years. If you find it with a mammogram and then treat it, they live 10 years. So that's good because they live 3 years longer. The problem is it would take 3 years for the cancer to grow to the point where they could see it. So eventually, if you started the clock at the same time, they live the same amount of time. Except they live 3 years more knowing they had cancer and having all the effects of surgery and radiation and chemotherapy. So it actually backfired on you because you just ended up spending 3 years worried and treating cancer, which did you no good. But somehow they think that is a success, and it isn't. So at the end of the day, if you actually look at the facts, I would say there's no reason to get screened for cancer ever. So, like personally, I cannot imagine getting a screening test for cancer. And I never recommended any patient to do it. And I don't see that it has any benefit at all. And in order to change my mind, I would have to see a study that demonstrates that's the case. And it would have to be done in a way that is actually valid. And I've never seen that.
Early in the conversation, you talked about this war on cancer that started back in the early 70s. You just got into screening. We talked about the problems with the conventional theory early on. But given this war on cancer, 52 years it's been going on, what do you feel we've accomplished, if anything, in the conventional realm?
Scaring people. I mean, that's the whole point. Fear sells, and fear leads to control. And that's the point. I don't know how else to say it. That's why and like laundering money. Maybe that's the second one. In other words, you take all these good students, supposedly bright people, and you have them spend their life doing nonsense. And so you extract money from the common people, right? Like us, through so-called taxes or confiscatory, what's the word? Violence. You take their money and give it to the NIH to study cancer. And you got all these cancer researchers studying the minutiae of the genes. And that way they spend their life without ever asking the question, Are you sure it's the genes that do this? Because once your whole career is based on finding the mutation in the next gene, if somebody comes along and says that whole mutation gene thing is hogwash, you will fight with all you've got to keep your job and your sense that your life was meaningful. And they've got literally thousands, maybe millions of otherwise smart people doing this project and getting nothing. And they keep doing it because, it's like I said, you go in, it's like with the virus thing. You got a guy who's 3 years out of his PhD in virology, and he's got a job working in a virus lab, and he hears this Cowan guy talking about there's no viruses, and here's how to do the study to show that there is or isn't. So he says, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. So he does the study, finds out, lo and behold, the whole thing is nonsense. He repeats it and repeats it, and he shows that this thing is nonsense. He goes to the head of virology department, says, here, I got this paper. Here's the experiments I did that show that this cell culture doesn't prove there's a virus. That's how we prove it. Guy, head of the department, reads it and says, yeah, that's really good work. You really, did your scientifically valid diligence. It's great stuff. And by the way, you're fired. So he goes home to his wife. Wife says, how's your day? Well, I showed him this paper and he said it was great. And I proved that there's no such thing as a virus. And what happened then? The guy fired me. How are we going to send our children to Harvard? And I got this Mercedes. And what are you going to do for a living? Well, I think I'm going to grow carrots. You don't even know how to grow a tomato. Like, how are you going to make a living growing carrots? And by the way, I'm going to divorce your sorry ass because you shouldn't have done this. And that's where the scientific community is at. Now, people will criticize, oh, but these are high integrity people. Yeah. But I think Upton Sinclair said, never try to convince somebody of something who makes his living believing the opposite.
That's tough.
It is. I mean, I don't know. I'm fortunate somehow that I never had to be in that situation. I started medical practice thinking this is wrong. I'm going to do it my own way. I never took insurance. I never joined a group. I set up my own thing. Nowadays, these doctors come 300,000 in debt. If they get a job working for, the ER or in the hospital, and they say, this isn't right, and they fire them, and what are they going to do? It's a horrible situation because they have these people over a barrel. And I'm not saying that's the only thing, but I don't remember the question either. But
Well, we have people like yourself, Kelly Brogan, Katie Deming, a lot of people challenging this system and these beliefs. What's it going to take to really change it?
well, it's not going to come from the top, and it's not going to come from the government. It's not going to come from the, Health and Human Services firing people, because the people they get are just as bad, if not worse. It's, these things are based in a large part on economics. So here's how it's going to work, I think. When people say, I'm taking agency myself, and that way makes no sense. And by the way, you can't even show me that it works. And so I'm going to take myself and my money and my attention somewhere else. And then I want to know if anybody knows anything about this. And out of that will come people who say, yeah, I'm going to find out about this so I can be the one they ask, and they spend their money with me. It's not just about money, it's actually fun. You get to help people and listen to their story and get to know them, and it's great fun, and you make a good living. And, as somebody said, the way to change the system is not to overthrow the system, but to make something new that everybody goes to, and then it just dies. Nobody wants to go. And interestingly, you see sort of that hospitals closing right and left, right? I've heard that. I don't know for sure, but that rural hospital, they're all closing. The ones in the city are consolidating, closing. They can't get people to go anymore. So anybody listening, the agency is in your hands. You get to decide, at least so far. Maybe someday they're going to force you to do things, but right now they're not. So we still have the agency.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
I don't know the amount of money spent on researching this oncogene theory, and they got nothing. Nixon announced the war on cancer. We're going to spend whatever it takes, and in 10 years, cancer will not be.